It is every police leader's responsibility to not only continually develop their own skills and abilities, but to prepare the next generation of leaders. Retired Captain William Frost helps you meet this task by providing a clear blueprint to follow in his book, Leadership in Law Enforcement. To learn more about his book and other consulting and training he provides, go to www.code33consulting.com. That's code33consulting.com.
We have to realize that human trafficking is all around us. Does not care if you are in a big city or small city. Does not care the color of your skin, your gender, what your belief system is, what your socioeconomic status is. Human trafficking can find its way into any community.
Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I'm joined by Sgt Kyle Baker. Sarge, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Eric, thanks for having me, man. Super excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So January, we're going to get into it, but this episode is focused on human trafficking and human trafficking efforts and the things that we can do for this critical topic. I really appreciate getting connected with Kyle on LinkedIn, and he reached out letting me know that January was Awareness Month for this topic. And so this episode is going to flip around pretty quick when you hear it. We are recording in January, so we're on a little bit of a timeline, but something that's so impactful for me is just in my patrol day to day over the years when I was an officer, how much stuff is related and how many signs we may see in our quote unquote routine calls, which there's no such thing as we know, related to human trafficking and where we can detect victims or soon to be victims of that. But we will get into all that. But Sarge, I just wanted to start off by welcoming you and I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and what brought you into law enforcement and whether human trafficking was always a focus or how that evolved.
Yeah, Eric, well, Happy New Year's, and absolutely January is a super pivotal month, being Human Trafficking Awareness and Prevention Month. So I appreciate you having me on, and this conversation is not always the easiest, and it's a topic that can be difficult and challenging to discuss and understand, but it's important. So a little bit about me. I am a police sergeant in Pittsburg, California. There is no H on the end there, a little bit of trivia for your listeners. But essentially, I am in the Bay Area. So if you drew an imaginary line between Sacramento and San Francisco, you would pretty much hit exactly where I am, which will come into play later as far as the environment of human trafficking that is in the Bay Area. My dad was a cop for 28 years here at this agency, so it's home.
Oh, legacy.
It's always where I wanted to be, always what I wanted to do, despite the small time at 16 years old when he wanted me to be a firefighter, but I ended up winning that battle. And I've had a wonderful career over the last 14 years. I've held a myriad of assignments from patrol to FTO, our street crimes unit. I was on our SWAT team for a decade, finished up as our SWAT team leader, worked down at our police academy, was a detective for a number of years, and I've held a few different supervisory roles. Currently, I supervise our hiring and training unit.
That's a heavy lift, man. Been there.
Oh, man. You know, 2025 now. And I will say this, and I agree with, a lot of the things that you've said on your episodes. I think the pendulum is swinging back the opposite direction. For us, there's a lot more good applicants out there, and I think we're seeing a shift. But no doubt, as you know, it's a challenging role.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of segue into how this human trafficking world kind of fell into my lap, it was honestly total coincidence. In 2016, I was selected as a detective here at our police department, and originally that role was a narcotics role. And, so here I am, brand new detective, young cop, excited, energetic. And I wind up in our investigations unit, and the first week I'm up there, my boss slides a case across my desk. And I was like, cool. I was like, what kind of drugs is it? Mm-hmm. Who are we going after? Where are they? And he's like, no, Kyle, it's a human trafficking case. And I was like, what is that? And that first initial case was a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old, two young girls from our community that essentially were picked up by three men, taken to a hotel, drugged, photographed, sold on the internet for the purposes of commercial sex. And that was essentially the pin, the domino that dropped for me to realize that human trafficking exists. It happens everywhere. The victims are real. And it totally drew me in and really launched the trajectory of my career that I had no idea would ever go where it went.
Yeah, that's so impactful. And I like how you just outlined those things. And no one will dispute that children are our most vulnerable population, that a lot of us step up to do this job. Whether or not we're even parents at the time, I think we all recognize, we see the little ones like running around in the community, and we're like, yeah, if not for anyone else, through all the vile and the vitriol and all the hate that we've experienced in the last few years, I think that one thing that circles us back quickly is the next generation, right? How do we leave this place a little bit better? Or even for the cynics, like, how do we maintain it so it doesn't get a little bit worse? But such a big deal. And as you described that case, just getting it and learning some of the circumstances, it takes me back to a lot of the patrol level investigations where it involved kids, runaways, and how frustrating, how emotional, how heavy those cases can be.
Yeah, no doubt. And, I think that's an important thing for us to realize is, I always, the number one mantra whenever I speak, whether it's to officers, whether it's to community groups, city councils, etc., is with this topic and other related topics, we must not panic, but we have to be aware, and we have to be willing about talking about it, which is why I think this is such a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any things that stick out to you as far as like the course of you starting to learn about human trafficking and investigations that were extremely surprising to you as you've become a subject matter expert through the years?
Yeah, so when I think back to 2016 and now fast forward, I guess nearly 9 years later, essentially after that case, that's what I really began to focus on. So over several years of being a detective, I worked hundreds of commercial sex investigations, started testifying in court, which eventually led to holding leadership positions on a human trafficking task force. Eventually got promoted, went back and supervised our special investigations unit, which focuses on that. And now that's kind of led down the path of some of these other roles that I have outside the walls. And when I look back and whenever I teach, especially cops in these areas, the first thing that I have to get off my chest is there are so many mistakes that I've made over the course of those years, and things that conversations I wish I could get back, relationships I wish I would have developed better, and certainly cases I wish I would have taken in another direction. And what I relate it to for all the cops listening, and honestly, even if you're not in law enforcement, this kind of comparison, I venture to guess that if I went to your agency, and then I went to Baltimore, Maryland, and then I went to Orlando, Florida, and then I went to Pittsburg, California, and I asked 3 police officers, how do you handle a robbery call? I venture to guess it's going to be pretty similar.
Yeah, well, we get a template almost, right?
Almost a template, right? Mm-hmm. We get the call for service. We start responding. We start making plans, perimeters. Do we have air? And kind of the list goes on. The thing is about human trafficking is we're still writing that book. We're still writing that punch list. Mm-hmm. And if you think about law enforcement over the last couple decades, we didn't always get it right when it came to this stuff. We treat it as a prostitution problem.
Yeah.
They're choosing to do what they want to do. Well, it's really hard for a 14 or a 15-year-old to choose to sell themselves on the internet.
Yeah.
So for me, the main takeaway, if I had a couple from really the last almost decade of working this stuff, is number one, we have to realize that human trafficking is all around us. It doesn't matter. Human trafficking is the most unbiased entity in the world. Does not care if you are in a big city or small city. Does not care the color of your skin, your gender, what your belief system is, what your socioeconomic status is. Human trafficking can find its way into any community. And in order to combat human trafficking, we have to be champions of relationships. Mm. And I got a quick story I'll share with that and why it's so important. As a young detective, 2018, I had a case. And this case was a young lady that was picked up in our town by the prom king. And I say the prom king because she went to high school with this guy. She was now 19 years old at the time of this case. And she was going through a hard time. He was broadcasting her tough times on social media, how she was having troubles with money and depression and such. Well, all of a sudden, the prom king, who had never paid her any attention before, decided that he was going to start paying her attention. So ultimately, they develop a relationship. He picks her up from her house in Pittsburgh. He says he has no idea what is about to unfold. She's taken to Oakland, California. She's made to walk the Blade, which is an open air market for sex trafficking. She has sex for money, and eventually she's raped by this guy and dropped back off the next day. Now, what was interesting is when I started investigating the case, she had deleted all of her messages on her phone, which kind of was a little bit of a cue and a red flag, but I kind of just went with it. She was super traumatized, of course. And essentially, as I worked that case the first 3 or 4 days, the idea or the story she was saying was basically almost a kidnapping in a way, right? That she had no idea any of this stuff was going to happen. About that 3rd or 4th day, I went and got a victim advocate from one of our local nonprofits. And the next day, after being connected to that victim advocate, the victim called me and said, "Hey, Detective Baker, can I come in and talk to you?" And you ever had those conversations where, like, you get off the phone and you know it's not necessarily going to be good?
Oh, all the time.
All the time, right?
From all angles, absolutely.
Oh, man. So I knew something was up. So she came in, and essentially what she told me was, "Hey, I knew that we were going to go out and do prostitution that day, but once it started happening, here's what happened, X, Y, and Z, and why I felt forced." And it totally made no difference that she was a victim. She was 100% a victim. It makes no difference anywhere if you agree to go out and do prostitution and then you're still exploited by somebody. It doesn't make you any less of a victim, but she felt uncomfortable coming forward. What changed that was the victim advocate. Where I failed was not introducing that victim advocate at the beginning because I had not developed the relationships with the advocates that I have now. Oh. And so that is such a key thing for folks listening when it comes to human trafficking is, one, at your agencies and communities, do not run away from the fact that these cases can happen and be prepared for them. And number two, you better cultivate those relationships early because they can make an impact.
Yeah, man, I like a lot of what you outlined, and even to go back to relationship. And originally I was thinking about how that connects to the officer's relationship. And we have to recognize a lot of times, this has come up in different episodes, but we come in and chaos is present, right? And a lot of times we have folks that we identify as like not wanting our help and all those things, but we have to recognize, like, zoom out. They may be putting on a front because the pimp is watching. They may be putting on a front because the bottom bee or whatnot, right? These other prostitutes that may be more, I suppose, coercive in the culture are watching, or other people are watching that they don't trust. At the same time, they might be resistant because they've had no positive interactions with law enforcement, or maybe they tried to report something and then because of all these circumstances, it didn't pan out, and it did backfire on them, right? They did catch some actual additional violence from those that are controlling them, right? So we have to be sensitive to these things and not be sensitive to our own feelings, recognizing that, hey, if you're going to come out on patrol, be patient, get what info you can, follow up, right? Follow up later. Someone else, Detective Hat, can follow up oftentimes, whether it's a gun violence call or whether it's a human trafficking call. Just some time and distance in a different face in a not blue suit can change that dynamic drastically. And even, you showing up later with an advocate can absolutely do that too.
Yeah, 100%. And the paths that you just outlined are exactly what I discuss ad nauseum to chiefs of police, to other police departments, to other task force. So two things I'll highlight that you said. I'll go back to the robbery analogy. Pretty much 9 times out of 10, I'll say 10 times out of 10 if it's a legit robbery, and an officer goes on scene, that victim wants help. That
Yeah.
victim wants to tell you everything that happened. They want to give you a description. They want to say which way the guy went. They want to talk about what was taken from them. They want help. So for an officer, especially a young officer that got into this career to go out, fight crime, help people, catch bad guys, that's a very easy call to go to in the sense of, hey, I know I'm helping somebody right now. Vice versa. Victimology 101 when it comes to human trafficking victims. They have had layers and layers of trauma built inside of them over horrible experiences that can range back for years.
Mm-hmm.
So when an officer thinks that they're investigating a human trafficking case or maybe something similar is present, a lot of times they can get frustrated because a victim may not want help for all the reasons that you said. So it's a training piece and it's a culture piece within how are we responding to these type of calls? Are we out proactively looking for them? I think that that's incredibly important. And the second thing I'll highlight that you said that I absolutely love is if there's one piece of advice that can go to agencies, big or small, the way that you're successful in combating human trafficking, number one, train your cops. Train them.
Mm-hmm.
Understand what the laws are in the area you work. Understand what some of the indicators and trends are. Understand victims and how to have a trauma-informed, victim-centered approach. And have a mindset within your organization and a plan within your organization of how you're going to handle these cases. So if the police officer at 2 o'clock in the morning somehow finds themselves in a situation where they have a victim that's being forthcoming, well, how's your agency handling that? Do you guys have something set up to where you can call in investigators, call in a task force? Maybe it's a really tiny agency. That's okay. What resources do you have in your area that can help you through this? Just what is the pathway to make sure these cases don't fall through the cracks? So I appreciate what you said because it's spot on.
No, yeah, thank you. Know your resources, right? That's a key tenet for anything that you're trying to navigate, any problem solving, and even when we talk about advocacy, because those resources may range. But something that popped into mind, like oftentimes, like we might have more visible or more apparent domestic violence advocates, and they may be absolutely resources because they're like, yep, there's a DV component, or yep, it's actually addressing all the same things we're trying to do here. There's also these nonprofits, right? Blue Bridge and different things where we can get some people some temporary housing. Maybe you can't reach who you need to reach in the middle of the night. And so you get them a motel room, you get them some sort of stability, because that's the thing is like everything I've learned about the victims here is like they've had no stability. They've had no actual agency to control anything. Money's controlled, their network, their communications, right? Like, do they even have full access to their phone, or is it all monitored? Like all these things. So we got to recognize these challenging dynamics. And it makes me think of something you said earlier where the book is still being written. And in these types of vice crimes, quote unquote, right? Like they're on to what we're on to. And so it continues to change. And when I started, like Pacific Highway, like just Highway 99, I think for most of where it is from Seattle and north of there, south, where I'm at, we had what was called the track. You mentioned the Blade, and it was where, like the movies or like the video games, where you'd see very apparent prostitutes walking up and down in scantily clad, outfits, and it still exists in places not where we are, but that was what you saw. You saw prostitution and loitering, right? Just walking around, and then it went to Craigslist and Backpage and these things, and then they get shut down or they pivot off, and so there's always something else that these true predators of society are going to use to exploit its most vulnerable people. Who are these? Who are these people? And I like how you pointed out, like, it doesn't discriminate. It's all genders, all races, all cultures, but they are extremely vulnerable people. The people that are down to their luck, they're cut off, they don't have these things. And so that's why I brought up runaways earlier. Like, oftentimes that is something that we should really perk up that spidey sense and look out for these clues and be aware as we handle a quote unquote simple chronic runaway. There could be some pretty dire consequences embedded in there.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you bring up a super good point and something to highlight. So back to kind of the geography of the Bay Area and where I'm located. So to the north of us, we have Sacramento, which is the capital, huge city, major blade, a couple of them actually. So major hotspot for pimping, pandering, sex trafficking. Out to the west is Oakland and San Francisco. Down to the south is San Jose. And then out to the east is Stockton. So it's almost this perfect diamond shape of areas that have open air markets for sex trafficking, and they're just major metropolitan cities. And so, to your point of the evolution of human trafficking over the years, at one point it was all street based, right? And you talked about the blades that used to be up there along the highway and in some of those cities. Those do still definitely exist in certain places in the country, certainly here in the Bay Area. But now it's just so mobile with all the different websites and social media that ads will be posted on. And that's why a huge thing that I really want bosses at agencies to know is that, and I'll go back to the robbery because it's simple. If a robbery happens, you and I work for neighboring agencies, cities right next to each other. If the robbery happens in your city, it's your guy's robbery. Robbery happens in my city, it's our robbery. It's our responsibility. Maybe there's some mutual aid or something that happens like that, depending on the level of crime, but ultimately it's our responsibility. Well, what I've seen over the years, and I've tried to combat, especially within our county, is the old mantra of, ooh, yeah, that's not really ours. That's really yours. Yeah, maybe one date happened in our city, but she lives in yours, or the majority of the things happened actually in another county. That can't be the mindset with human trafficking. It is far too mobile. It is far too devastating. One of the greatest things that I appreciate that my organization did a number of years ago that really set the tone before I started getting involved, and then I've continued to try to push that forward onto other agencies now, is we have a ton of autonomy to run with these type of cases. And I don't know the laws in every state, but at least here in California, one thing that they get right with the human trafficking laws is it's very easy to adopt cases that have nexus to other jurisdictions as long as you have something in your county. So I'm a huge proponent of organizations allowing their people to really run with these cases, no matter where it may take them, within reason, of course. But ultimately, the notion of, okay, that's their burglary over there. That shooting happened over there. That's their problem. Call that agency, whatever. That really shouldn't be the case with human trafficking.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many complicated dynamics when you try to parcel out these little things, and that's where things get dropped, and then you don't see the totality of the issue, right? So to make a comparison, like organized retail theft, that's a devastating thing for a lot of economies and a lot of communities. But if we just treat it all like these little one-offs and don't recognize that these people are working in tandem, and it is organized crime, and the gravity of the situation, right? The sum of loss and how these people are just they're killing these stores, right? So it's very similar. And even in that, right, it made me think about how so many patrol calls may have the clues of human trafficking in there, right? There's the trafficked that are committing these crimes under coercion or what have you. But I want to ask you what some of the clues or some of the little things that patrol officers may see in their day-to-day, week-to-week, that may be sign that someone's being trafficked. And then we can get into signs of the traffickers, right? So simple traffic, quote unquote, simple traffic stop, or, an engagement on this dispute call. Like, what are some things that people may see?
Yeah, good question. So there's really 3 or 4 types of patrol calls that you will most likely see human trafficking if it's going to be present. Number one is going to be domestic disputes, like you said. Number two are going to be any type of calls at a hotel, motel. Number three, traffic stops, without a doubt. And then number four, runaways. What I've seen in watching so many body camera footage over the years and meeting victims after the fact of a patrol call is the level of training for your organization and recognizing these signs and symptoms will equate into being able to identify what is actually happening. So on any given call, what are some things to look out for? Number one is going to be, what are the dynamics of a relationship that is occurring? So a lot of times when a patrol officer will stumble upon a pimp and a victim, the way that they will mask their relationship is usually some type of significant other relationship, right? That's my boyfriend, that's my girlfriend, that's my friend, etc. What we see a lot of times, though, is there's a big difference, and not all the time because certain cultures roll a different way, but most domestic disputes that we go to, you can kind of see that there's 2 parties, let's say, they're having a disagreement, maybe there was a crime that occurred, but there isn't necessarily this clear, definitive hierarchy between the 2 people. And with human trafficking cases, with pimping pandering cases, there's always a level of hierarchy. And if you pay attention closely, what you'll see is that a lot of times when talking to the victim, they will be, whether you do everything right, let's say you separate them and do all the things that we're taught around this country to do when you're handling domestic disputes, you will still see a wanting and notion that they're trying to see if they're being caught talking to law enforcement from that exploiter. It's quick eye looks, it's quick listening. Oh, I don't want to talk to you here, let's talk over there. Now that stuff by itself may not necessarily, it's a human trafficking or it's a pimpy pandering case, but then let's start to talk a little bit about, well, what's the financial kind of situation here? Who works? What do you do for work? A lot of times, sadly and unfortunately, you will see with victims of human trafficking, especially females, some of the indicators, the physical indicators, you'll see a very honestly disheveled appearance, unless they're out working and they've gotten done up in, some of those provocative outfits and all the makeup and nails and such. Most of the other times you're going to find them kind of in sweats, not really looking too healthy. That's a huge part of it because, like you said, everything's usually controlled by the exploiter. So, things like hygiene and personal health and such is usually not a huge priority for them. So certainly when you now go to a call and you're seeing, okay, we have this weird relationship going on. Maybe the age doesn't make sense. Maybe it should be a red flag off the bat if you have anybody under the age of 18 that's with somebody else and you cannot explain. That's not the brother. That's not the parents, the aunt, the uncle. It's not the best friend. Like that should be an all stop. But let's say you have an 18 or 19-year-old victim, but the guy she's with is 36. Okay, well, some people have relationships of all ages. That's no big deal. But now they're talking about how they just left a hotel. That's kind of weird, right? Car stops are probably the easiest way to see if there's a relationship. I'll give you an example. Just 2 weeks ago, we're doing a proactive operation here in our town. We just doubled up that day. We were doing sex registrant sweeps and just doing proactive patrol. So I doubled up with like a 8-month cop that I actually hired. So that was really fun.
Oh, nice.
And we did a traffic stop. It was super weird. We were in a shopping center. There was a guy standing by ATM. He saw us. We were in an unmarked silver Ford Explorer, but he knew we were cops. There's no doubt about that. So he gets into his car and he makes a bunch of weird turns trying to figure out which way he's going to go. Goes all the way around the shopping complex, thinks that we didn't know that we could get out that way. We eventually catch up to him. He's got a bunch of vehicle code violations. We pull him over. He pulls over, male driver, female passenger. He is looking exactly like I said, super ragged, disheveled, starts yelling and screaming at us off the bat, which is just a kind of a trauma response for sure. He ends up having a warrant for prostitution. And then when we searched the car, there was condoms and high heels and lingerie and a bunch of toiletries. Those are all the things that you'll commonly see in a car with the individuals involved in the commercial sex trade. So that was a case and a good example for listeners out there. Ultimately, she had a warrant. We had to bring her back to the station. There was nothing illegal in the car, and he hadn't violated any laws that we could really figure out at that point in time. So that was one of the ones where we collected all the information. We took a bunch of pictures of what was inside the car, and that got forwarded to our special investigations unit to do further follow-up. So not every time you run across this stuff, you're going to be able to take a bad guy to jail, be able to rescue a victim. You may have to work at this thing over time, but again, it's having those pathways. So to recap in a nutshell for the officers out there, understand that human trafficking exists in the form of commercial sex trafficking. There's going to be usually a pimp victim type dynamic. You will see that in how they interact. A lot of the male subjects involved in pimping can be very flashy, wearing chains, but not necessarily all the time. That's the thing is, it's more difficult to spot an exploiter than it is a victim, to be honest. But again, go into these calls for service. What does the physical appearance look like? What is the relationship dynamic? And just take your time in talking to these people. It's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all about the long game, what you just described, right? But I mean, talk to some investigators if you're a newer cop, and whether it's the robbery spree or whether it's the trafficking case, or like these large trying to take down a pimp and what goes into that. Man, these contacts are so valuable. So even that cops that, they're trying to get their footing and it's post COVID and they didn't feel super proficient in being proactive, like just start where you're comfortable in traffic stops, and then documenting who's with who can be so huge, and documenting what you saw and even what you said, right? Like the heels, this and that, and some of the dynamics. So just in a quick field interview or a quick case, just to have that on record, that could help somebody piece these things together down the line for a pretty big case.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, we've covered a lot of ground, but I want to see if there's anything you want to kind of summarize and close with in recognition of just trying to bring more light to human trafficking and the efforts and challenges therein.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation, and I hope folks get a lot out of it. I'm always available for questions, comments, concerns, especially as it relates to human trafficking. Just a couple takeaways that I hope people can bring back to their patrol teams, back to their agencies, back to their bosses and their communities. Number one, human trafficking is not really what is portrayed in the movies, right? When we think of human trafficking movies, we think of the movie Taken. I love Liam Neeson, great movie. And it's not to short what could happen in other countries. But here in the U.S., it's pretty rare to have people just kidnapped off the streets and forced into sex or labor. These cases more show their ugly head in relationships, people that know each other. It just takes a vulnerable victim, somebody that's down on their luck, been through abuse, going through hard times, going through depression, and an exploiter to realize that, to pull them into this world to make money from having sex. And then secondly, we, over the years, have covered a lot of ground in doing better in law enforcement at a lot of things, but for sure in the area of human trafficking. But to your point that you said earlier, and the phrase that I'll use is, we have to always exploit all options in order to be able to, or really exhaust. Exploit's probably not the best word. Exhaust all options in these cases, because you may not have a cooperative victim when you're really starting off. And understanding that these cases take time, they take work, they're real. And then with the cherry on top, always making sure that you're having the conversations in your community, you're educating them on what human trafficking is, because I'm telling you, the average citizen does not know what human trafficking is, what they can look out for, how they can contact law enforcement. So it's a team effort. Build those relationships, understand it exists, look for ways to help victims, and hold exploiters accountable. And with that, I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah, I love it, man. Such a strong summary and so many good takeaways that, your patrol officers going back in, some of these things might not be super new, but it's a fantastic refresh and just a calibration of, okay, cool, these are things to look out for. I do remember hearing that or seeing that kind of thing. So thank you so much for your time, Sarge. And I mentioned LinkedIn before, but where can people find you and get in contact with you?
Yeah, no doubt. What I'll do is maybe I'll shoot you a good email contact, and when you throw this out there, you can attach to that. But definitely LinkedIn's a very easy way to get a hold of me. And it's obviously public, so easy to shoot me a message or anything on that. And certainly willing to help or hear or listen or do anything I can for anybody.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Kyle.
Thank you.
Lastly, the Memento Mori gear. When you go to bluegritwellness.com/shop or click on shop, you'll see the stickers, you'll see the shirts. And the shirts are in partnership, or not really partnership, but I've decided to slice off a chunk of the proceeds to QRF Up Foundation, right? So it's an organization, find them on social media, QRF Up. They are supporting the suicide prevention of first responders and veterans. They're a really impressive group of people and an app that is based on that. So check that out. Check out their website. Check out their social. They're growing super fast in such a good way because it's about saving lives. But anyway, every purchase of the Memento Mori shirt, thank you for all your shares, all your comments, feedback, questions, sending it to a buddy, putting it on your social, all your reviews, even going to Spotify and Apple and giving, a 5-star review, 5-star rating, like that stuff all helps. I'm learning about podcast SEO and optimization, and it goes so much to that type of stuff. So although I do feel kind of annoying by asking, I do really appreciate it. So a lot of you that do reach out saying how much you appreciate the project, how good it is for the first responder community and the police community, thank you. It does mean a lot. It keeps me super motivated to put back into this. At the same time, if you are able to take a moment and do that, extremely, extremely helpful. With that, I wish you a good rest of your January. Thank you so much. It means so much. I'm super humbled by sharing this time and space with you and you sharing it back with me in this project. Thank you. Stay safe and stay gritty. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.